put your mobiles on mute.
And I think it's time.
Indeed.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. Antonella, would you like to say a few words about the series as a whole?
Of course. Okay, thank you, Cosmin. I'm Antonella Vassallo. I'm the Managing Director at IOI Headquarters, based in Malta. And since all of you are here, you probably know about the IOI's training and capacity development programs. And you know as well that the IOI over the years has had the privilege and the honor to train a large number of ocean practitioners from different disciplines and different stages of their career. And many of these, having graduated through and completed IOI training programs, we consider not only to be members of the IOI's global family, but also quite talented people in our IOI alumni. They're all early career ocean practitioners, and one thing that the IOI is committed to continue delivering is continuous professional updates. So in this spirit, back in I think 2021, we started an alumni program composed of training events, short seminars, short webinars. And what we did in 2023, we turned our focus on delivering quarterly webinars, which are 90-minute focused webinars on topics which are gathering interest, gaining importance in the ocean world. This year, we will continue to offer our quarterly webinars. This year, they will focus a lot on the ocean climate interface, and we'll be looking at it from very different perspectives in each webinar. So without further ado, thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the time to be here. I leave you in the hands of Cosmin, who will be moderating this session. And we have three excellent, excellent speakers, I can tell you. And each speaker will be more than happy to take your questions at the Q&A session at the end. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Cosmin. Thank you, our dear speakers. It's in your hands now.
Thank you very much, Antonella. I'm delighted to serve as your moderator for today's discussion. Just a quick run-through on the concept of this webinar. Basically, in the wake of COP28, we find ourselves at a point where the complex challenges posed by climate change and ocean sustainability need urgent addressing. Today, we will embark on a journey to explore the crucial interplay between these two vital domains, and of course, their implications for global policymaking. Throughout this webinar, we will be hearing from our three distinguished experts here today with us, who will share their insights on key themes such as ocean governance frameworks, adaptation strategies, and the resilience of fisheries in the face of climate change. I also encourage all the participants to actively engage in the discussions. We have the Q&A session at the end, and please feel free to pose questions as we go along. Of course, then, as much as we can in the time allowed at the end, we will explore these questions. And we really look forward to seeing your insights as well on the topics discussed here today. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I will not be able to do justice to the full bio notes of our three speakers, but what I will be doing is posting their LinkedIn profiles in the chat. So if you'd like to learn a bit more, they have decades of experience, all three of them. Please follow the links and follow them on LinkedIn as well. Without further ado, I would like now to introduce our first speaker for today, which is Professor Simone Borg, Malta's Ambassador for Climate Action, who also chairs the National Climate Action Board. She is a resident full professor at the University of Malta, specializing in climate law and policy and the law of the sea and ocean governance, particularly in relation to the conservation of living marine resources. Simone, please go ahead. You are muted currently.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a great joy to be here with you all, a lovely number of people coming in, and I thank IOI for this opportunity to share this moment with you. Mindful of the time, I would not like to take more than 20 minutes, so we have ample time for the questions at the end. Cosmin, can I kindly ask you to share the presentation, please?
Yes, of course, Simone. Just 1 second.
Okay. In the meantime, I'll just make an introduction. So my background is in law. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how the law tries to come to terms with all the scientific information that we have on both climate change and the state of the ocean. And so this is what in a very limited time I will be discussing with you. So we're good to go?
Just 1 second and
okay. Okay. The title of the presentation, in fact, is Climate Change Impacts on the Ocean, a Journey Through Uncharted Waters, in the sense that in reality, the law, and when I say the law, it's both international law, that is the law that binds states, but also national law, that then translate what is an international law into national law, because humanity never had to deal with these kinds of problems. And so it is really very wise to understand that this is an area, a legal area where we haven't gone before, trying to really make legal sense, so as to say, with the science that is available. As you know, there are the linkages, the scientific linkages between climate and the ocean, and other speakers will be talking about this, are very intricate. We all know that science, for example, tells us that effects of climate change on the ocean are biological, chemical, and physical. Physical because there are changes. The ocean is warming, and the ocean is becoming, as a result of the melting of the ice caps, we are in fact, we know about sea level rise and all the tragic consequences that will bring about. But there are also physical changes. Besides physical changes, there are also biological ones, like coral bleaching, and chemical ones. That is the water quality, acidification, the oxygenation, etc., are all affecting the health of the oceans. Economists and political analysts tell us that climate change impacts on the ocean are drastic, and they will have very strong both environmental but also geopolitical repercussions. In the law itself, when it comes to law and also policy making, both oceans and climate are regulated separately, because obviously human beings tend to categorize things, and rather than integrating issues, they tend to work in silos, which is a huge problem. If we can go to the next slide, What is the position, for example, at the moment with international climate law? Very briefly, as you know, the process has been going on since 1991, 92, basically. We have 3 climate treaties, the Framework Treaty, the Kyoto Protocol, and then the Paris Agreement. It's a very, very acrimonious process because we are talking about fossil fuels and adaptation, and a lot of costs are involved. There are many socio-economic repercussions. What we have also very interesting, however, with the climate process, the lawmaking process at the international level, is the IPCC. That is this body, the scientific body, which constantly provides information. And it is the conventions, then the treaties that try to back up what the science is saying, to reflect what the science is saying, to prevent the harm that the science is actually predicting. If we go to the next slide, we see that international law in the ocean is a very old system, in the sense that law of the oceans has been there, present in the political and legal arena for a very long time, centuries old. It's one of the oldest, in fact, regulating various issues from navigation to fishing, but also relatively recently, also the marine environment. We have many treaties on pollution, dumping, scientific research, and this is an ongoing process. In fact, the latest developments include the BBNJ agreement, that is biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And this has been a treaty that's been in the making for around 10 to 15 years, and finally it's here, filling a very important gap. So we have volumes of also scientific knowledge on the oceans, but unlike climate, it's not does not come from one single body. If you look at the next slide, you'll have the state of play of applicable international law and policy. I mentioned the agreements, the climate ones, but also there are treaties like UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, that really established an entire chapter on the protection of the marine environment, which in 1982, when it was negotiated, was very, very innovative. Also, more recent ones, like the protection of biological diversity under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And then there are those treaties that regulate specific areas, like MARPOL on shipping, BBNJ I mentioned. What is also very interesting, there are various regional agreements for the Mediterranean, for example, for the North Sea, for the Gulf, etc., both with respect to the marine protection, the environment, and the protection of the marine environment, but also with respect to fisheries. In law, we have also unwritten law, which is ancient customary practice, as well as general principles of law. So it's not just treaties that make up this body of law, but also unwritten law. But I won't elaborate on that because it's too much of a legal issue. There is also what is known as soft law, that is non-binding documents, which are often policy documents, statements, plans, action plans. Examples include, for the IMO 2018 decarbonization plan for the shipping industry, various policy documents like Agenda 21, etc., etc. And although they are not legally binding, they are very influential in formulating policy and domestic law, national law. In fact, unless international law is translated into national legislation, it remains inoperable. So it's very important that what we agree upon at the international level finds itself in the laws of the various nation states. The next slide is a list of lessons learned, what is the best method to achieve this breakthrough from having scientific reports telling us what needs to be done, and the ultimate at the end of the spectrum, the need to implement the recommendations by science. So first you need to have this wealth of scientific information, which is corroborated, which needs to be independent, because obviously even science can be tainted with bias. There needs to be a narrative of translating those scientific results in a sort of a narrative that everybody, the person in the street understands, particularly that politicians understand, because in the end, they are the ones that are going to be elected and represent us and make the necessary laws. We need to understand the magnitude of the issues, the problem, how big the problem is, and the extent of the issues, okay, the impacts. Without the backing of economists, scientific reports remain on the shelf, in the sense that one needs to provide an economic impact assessment. If we do not do anything, if we are looking at this kind of harm that humans are inflicting on the climate, on the oceans, and we don't do anything, what is going to happen? What kind of losses are we talking about? And it is when you have sort of the science and the economic assessment that it is wise to step into the political arena, to influence politicians, to influence the electorate, because in the end, politicians want to appease the electorate. And this is what happens even thanks to the media. When issues are raised by the media and people start to become more and more aware of what is happening. Once you have that kind of, awareness, then it is much easier to start regulating and start to have a legal framework to address the problems that science has identified. I try to make it a bit simpler by identifying examples. For instance, if one goes to the next slide, if you look at what is happening, law has to control harm. We know that there is harm happening, that human activities cause climate change, that pollution leads to the degradation of the ocean, overfishing, etc. So we need to identify the type of harm. The law needs to identify, what am I going to address? The harm. The harm in case of climate change is warming. Then you also regulate the effects. So you tap the harm, you see where the harm is coming from, and supposedly the best results will tell you if you obliterate that harm, if you control it completely. That is why we talk about the phasing out of fossil fuels. Then one has to look also at the effects, because sometimes the harm, even if you stop it, the effects run over time. So if you're going to have sea level rise due to the melting of ice caps, what will happen when the ice caps melt? The albedo effect of the planet is weakened, so it will be even warmer. You will have more extreme weather events. This will have an impact on habitats and species. If the sea gets too warm, the methane hydrates encapsulated in crystals will melt and release methane, which is even more, is also a greenhouse gas. Then you look at the other types of harm, ocean acidification, for example, biodiversity loss, habitat degradation. The next slide shows us how then do we prevent and remedy the harm. We address GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the case of climate change, both on land and at sea. And we limit the harm by, as much as possible, preventing further pollution of the oceans and further overexploitation, at least to support biodiversity to be able to cope with the changes. The next slide shows us that the more we tend to look at climate and oceans in an integrated manner to prevent, mitigate, and adapt to the negative effects on both the oceans as caused by climate, but even the other problems that the ocean has, the more we are likely to be successful. So laws that improve degraded marine habitats, that ensure the sustainable use of natural resources. We need to also sort of foresee what can happen with sea level rise. Sea level rise might disrupt agreed boundaries, maritime boundaries, because you will have inundation, and so the measuring maritime boundaries becomes disrupted. And you're likely to have even conflict resolution needs between states as the effects of climate change become more and more intense. What we need to do, if we go to the next slide, is to stop working in silos. We need to look at realities. We need to look at the two issues, climate change and ocean governance, in an integrated manner, both at the domestic level, which is still very difficult because, as you know, at the domestic level, you have different ministries responsible for the environment, another ministry responsible for fisheries, another for the, I don't know, for blue economy, etc. So you have different ministries working, and it's not that easy sometimes for them to work together. At the multilateral level, it is even more problematic because it's more complex, because you have this time nation states, not just ministries, that have different circumstances, different backgrounds, different interests. There is also, if we look at the next slide, parallelism, working in silos, even at the scientific level. Climate scientists working on their own, ocean scientists working on their own. And even sometimes, as we've seen, if you have the fragmentation of scientific information, this tends to lose a lot of its effect. The next slide shows us how that parallelism exists even at the institutional and governance level, because we do organize sometimes summits at the UN level where you get heads of government agreeing on something, but it is very ad hoc, very sporadic. It depends a lot on the political goodwill of leaders, and leaders change. And when leaders change, one leader might not have the same goodwill that the one before him or her had. So we cannot rely on simply organizing these conferences to push the agenda forward. We need to have an institutionalized, a real legal framework that drives the message that continues with this progress. Examples exist. For example, at the moment, there is the meeting of the United Nations Environment Assembly in Nairobi. EU law is an example of integration because it has that advantage of the 27 member states forming one European Union. But even the regional institutions have been very successful in integrating, for instance, biodiversity with climate change and fisheries, and vice versa. The next slide. Some examples, very quick examples of remedies and solutions. So we need to answer what I've said before. We need, first of all, an integrated institutional setup. We need to learn to work like nature in an integrated manner. And this is essential to take a stock-taking exercise to identify where are the gaps, where are the conflicts, where are the overlaps. This is necessary to ensure that any new norms do not simply impact or duplicate others or conflict with others. So the integrated institutional setup is very important. At the moment, the ocean assessment exercise and the stock-taking exercise of the climate treaty is doing this kind of exercise. So these exercises do exist. Maybe one of the arguments and recommendations made recently has been to have something like the IPCC for the oceans. At the moment, there is an ongoing assessment of the oceans where the United Nations gathered the various institutions that usually gather information on the oceans. But some argue that it would be better to have a single institution like the IPCC. I would say that as long as various institutions work together, the problem would be solved to a certain extent. One does not need to reinvent the wheel. But it is also very important that scientific information is as much as possible coherent, and that the various bodies, especially scientific information on the oceans, is particularly targeted without causing different conflicting interpretation, etc. There is also the need for the involvement of non-state actors. And the best example is today's seminar. IOI has been very, very influential in getting people together, in promoting ocean literacy, in identifying how people can network and work together, and above all, how non-state actors can build awareness amongst the public, within institutions, etc. It serves a lot because it provides that kind of impetus, which with government sometimes is interrupted when there is a change in government, when, as I explained, there is a change in leadership, etc. But it also helps to mobilize funding for research, for example. This does not mean in any way that governments should shed their responsibility. Governments are there to lead. Governments have the responsibilities to negotiate treaties, to observe international law, and then to ensure that their domestic legislation is in keeping with the obligations found in treaties. They are the ones responsible for creating a level playing field and equitable solutions. Governments have to make sure that solutions do not appease one sector at the detriment of another or place vulnerable people, low-income earners, at a worse position. In a way, that was a very quick look how one looks at the law and how the law tries to bridge linkages between climate change and the ocean. The challenges are many, but I think a lot has already been done, and what we need more is further synergy and further cooperation. And with that, I conclude my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone. Just 1 second. It was an enlightening presentation. Thank you for going through the very important linkages between climate and the ocean, and also for your quick run through of the current governance frameworks. I hope that your insights into the adequacy of these existing frameworks in light of new climate agreements will get us some very challenging questions in the Q&A at the end.
Look forward to that. And the presentation can be made available because I rushed through it in the interest of time, so I won't take extra time. But I mean, maybe some people wanted to understand something more. So it will be, if you want to make it available to all our guests, it is, I'd be happy to forward it.
Thank you very much, Simone. I will now introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ute Jacob, who is a marine ecologist by training and has worked on complex ecological networks and marine ecosystem. She is now the co-leading the transfer office for Marine Biodiversity Change at the HIFMB, and she is involved in a number of projects facilitating the science policy interface for biodiversity and ecosystem services.
Thank you very much. I hope my presentation is in presentation mode and that you can hear me. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So thank you very much for the invite. And so as Kumin was saying, I'm by training a marine ecologist. I've worked on complex ecological networks, always questioning the why, like what is the research on complex ecological networks doing for biodiversity? Because biodiversity, or marine biodiversity for that matter, have always been at the core of my heart, and subsequently its conservation and avoiding the loss, bending the curve, if you want to use that phrase, and how it's threatened by different stresses, climate change being one of them. So again, thank you for having me here. So I would like to set the frame a bit. I'm very sure I'm talking to experts here. You all know that climate change is impacting marine biodiversity at a global scale, and that it's also globally realized that we need to get active in terms of strategies for adaptation or mitigation to increase conservation efforts. And that while you could hypocritically say, why care about marine biodiversity? But marine biodiversity and the ocean is very closely entangled to our own well-being. And so we really need to get active. And this is very well reflected in the Global Biodiversity Framework, where there were commitments to protect 30% of the planet by 2030, while also at the same time adapting for climate change. As we already heard, climate change is global, so interventions and strategies must go across political boundaries, and we just heard how complex that is. We need to prevent further climate change because, I mean, at the moment we are sort of at the crossroads what the future has in store for us. We saw by the recent wildfires, by the floods, by everything that is going on in the world right now. And climate change will continue to increase the risk for extreme temperature events, extreme weather events, and therefore, as I said, having a toll on people's lives. But whenever I talk about the loss of biodiversity or climate change, we cannot be blind. We cannot be blind that there's other aspects happening on the planet that are threatening any effort we are making to mitigating these crises, be it the pandemic or be it the different violent conflicts across the globe that are the largest in numbers since World War II. We have already heard in the news in the past recent weeks and months that the 1.5 target for global warming is already challenged, so we very likely will not meet that. We heard from the GBF, from the Global Biodiversity Framework, about several targets like the 30 by 30 target. And if we check what is at stake, it's the IPBES global assessment published a number of 1 million species being endangered for survival, and that the extinction rate is at least between 100 and 1,000 times above the background rate. We have a high number of species being critical, endangered, or at least vulnerable. What also is very worrying on this figure, because you could take it away as the message, oh, everything is green and beautiful. But what's very worrying are the gray areas where we just don't have enough information on the species, let alone on the species inventory. And what we also need is a reality check. So if we look at the numbers proposed by the GBF and also by the European Biodiversity Strategy to protect at least 30% of EU lands and seas by 2030 and representing 10% being strictly protected, we have a long way to go. So I am German, I'm allowed to call us out. What you see on the left-hand side is a visual from the German EEZ. And I don't know, can you see my mouse? This little tiny dot is the only area where fishing is completely banned. The other areas have temporal fishing, have bottom trawling, and are heavy use. So if we talk about protected areas, we need to discuss what we mean by protection and what it really means for the species affected. Because bottom trawling, we know, will affect this or is affecting the seafloor severely. And the science, on the other hand, is much further than that. So we are talking here about adaptive marine protected areas that allow for corridors, that allow for stepping stones, that allow for flexible sizes and positions and allow to accommodate the needs of migratory species. So there is a huge gap between what is implemented at the moment and what should be when we listen to what the scientists say. Same is true for another goal to substantially reduce the negative impacts of fisheries and extraction activities on sensitive marine habitats and species, including on the seabed in support of achieving good environmental status. Again, I have an example here from the North and from the Baltic Sea. We don't need to focus on the numbers just now, but what you can see that by 2021, we are still quite far away from the target of achieving a good environmental status, because everything is still very red and very orange. So we need to get active there. At the same time, in January 24, the European Parliament major parties have turned down the European Commission's proposal that would have banned mobile bottom trawling in marine protected areas. So just as a visual, again, what you see on the right-hand side is what we accept our marine protected areas to look like. And there is certainly the need to fix this one way or the other. So this is my question to you. So how do we fix it? This is not something I can answer. I need your help with that. And I think we need, well, what is the saying? It takes a village. So if we look at the conflicts, I mean, it's not easy. Neither the law nor the science nor the society have easy solutions. There are different targets that need to be achieved. We need to rebuild our fish stocks, to have a sustainable availability of fish for fishers and the communities. I mean, if you look at the numbers that were provided by the IPBES global assessment, is that 1 billion people use marine resources as their only protein source, and that over 200 million people are living or their livelihood depending on fisheries. So we definitely need to ensure their well-being. At the same time, we need to reduce the environmental and climate impacts of fisheries. And I think that Mark will enlighten us more in his presentation in a good bit. As I said, the 30 by 30 goal is there, and at the same time, we have the increased need to be better when it comes to our energy efficiency and to have more sustainable energy sources and to be climate neutral by 2050. So there's a lot of targets or goals that are conflicting in a way. However, if we look at marine conservation, it is quite clear that area-based conservation will be or should remain the cornerstone of marine biodiversity conservation at the moment. And community-based conservation might be a way to fix it. But this, as said before, needs a village. Community-based conservation, in its theoretical definition, strives to integrate culturally and social sensitive socio-economic developments with nature conservation to catalyze benefits for both people and nature. And it aims to foster stewardship of local ecosystems and biodiversity by enabling, championing, and elevating local and collaborative governance system and management practices. This sounds very good so far, but how is this done? Watson et al. And multiple colleagues in a special issue on integrative conservation, which I highly recommend as a read, proposed how community-based conservation can be used to embrace the perspectives that economy, which we also need, they are not the enemy, but we need them, society and the environment are nested rather than intersecting spheres. That is what Simone just also mentioned. We need to stop thinking in silos. We will need to integrate across economy, society, and environmental needs, because otherwise we will not succeed. So, as we know from the IPBES IPCC workshop report, when we look at the biodiversity and the climate crisis, you cannot have one without the other. You cannot solely focus on biodiversity or solely focus on climate. This will not lead to achieving sustainable and equitable benefits to people. A lot of land and ocean-based actions to protect, sustainably and manage, restore ecosystems have co-benefits for climate, and it's the other way around as well. Climate actions have also co-benefits for biodiversity. Sometimes you have conflicting results, but these need to be mapped and monitored so we know exactly what happens when we are doing what. But I think we cannot lose any more time not doing anything because we don't know what's going to happen. For MPAs to be also climate smart, because if you just focus on biodiversity, as said, it will not be enough. But for them to be climate smart, it's required to integrate a couple of adaptation strategies, such as having climate refugia or considering climate change implications for ecological connectivity and protective efficiency. Again, colleagues from Afra Daimau et al. Proposed 6 main areas where we should focus on. It's, do these MPAs represent enough habitat and habitat types? Do we have replication? Do we protect unique areas? Are we protecting climate refuge areas? Is there enough connectivity? I mean, so that we have this transboundary dispersal in future climates. Do we have, are we providing time for recovery for species, especially for those that are vulnerable to climate threats? Are we also allow time for recovery for future heat waves that are already modeled and will come for us? And are we minimizing and avoiding local threats? We need to understand these patterns of connectivity and identify potential climate refuge areas and levels of protection needed to maximize biodiversity, fisheries, and climate adaptations outcomes for our own well-being. Notably, to design these climate-smart networks of marine protected areas, we will also need to coordinate research programs and policies while considering cultural governance and management difference across borders. It takes a village. As much as we cannot do it without the economy sector, we cannot do it without society. There needs to be an acceptance for these kind of actions across sectors, because otherwise they will not succeed. And with that, I thank you. I'm also looking forward to the Q&A panel, and I hope you come up with some solutions and how we fix it. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacob. Thank you for your thought-provoking insights into adaptation and mitigation strategies and what's needed in order to address climate change, and also how this impacts ocean biodiversity. I'm seeing that your examination has underscored that there's a lot of work to be done in a very small amount of time to ultimately keep our planet habitable. And I guess our next speaker will also speak to us about this with the further emphasis on fisheries. So I would like to introduce Dr. Mark Dickey-Collas, who is a marine scientist operating independently as Dickey-Collas Marine, with expertise in the provision of scientific advice to governments for marine conservation, fisheries, biodiversity, and ecosystem-based management. Thank you very much for being with us today, Mark, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm just loading up my presentation. Hopefully I'll share my screen. Share content, screen window or tab. There we are. So let's see if you can see this. Can you see this?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yes.
Great. So I'm here today. My name is Mark Dickey-Collas. I'm here to talk about some research that we did on confronting climate change and addressing climate resilient fisheries. I think what's key, and both the other speakers have highlighted quite a lot already, that the marine challenges, and particularly fisheries, are ecological and social in terms of their problems and how they're affected by climate change. Policymakers, managers, scientists, and fishing communities are seeking guidance on how to holistically build resilience to climate change into our system. My background is that I used to be a chair of the ICES Advisory Committee, and we provided over 240 pieces of advice to governments and intergovernmental organisations across the North Atlantic. So let's think about fisheries as the social ecological system. We have the social system and we have the marine ecological system. And those two are interlinked and interacting, and both are dynamic. One involves the changing of perceptions, governance, and management of the marine systems. And the other is about the ecosystem response to the changes that are brought about by climate change. I'm going to talk mostly, well, completely about adaptation of behavior or processes to reduce impact or increase the opportunities from climate change. Whereas there is, of course, the whole issue of carbon mitigation to reduce the likelihood or severity of climate change. But I'm going to look at the former, adaptation. So simplistically, if we're talking about fish or ecosystem change, the two key issues are changes in productivity or changes in range in the resource that's being exploited. And this is a picture, very simple picture, taken from Steve Gaines's talk that he gave to FAO in 2019. If you have change in productivity, it affects caps on future yields, the dynamics of future yields. If you have changes in range, it affects where the fish are caught and who can catch them. And in many parts of the world, you'll find that this whole issue of fish moving over jurisdictional boundaries, which was already touched on earlier, can be quite a challenge. Also note that climate change also affects the seasonality and the timing, the phenology of fish production and fish extraction. We're very lucky though, humans are ingenious in many ways. We look for innovation, and fishers are adapting their approaches. They're finding a range of methods by which to keep fishing. It's already been touched on. The crucial part of being resilient to climate change is to have good fisheries management. And if you have already good fisheries management, but the productivity is going up or down, or the fish are moving out of your area, you need to find different mechanisms. You can stop fishing, you can switch species, you can trade your quota, you can target and diversify your markets, you can add value through other processes. So there's a whole host of mechanisms that fishers and the industry, the processing and marketing industry, are in fact already engaging in. And to give the quality of this, I took this figure from the FAO technical report from 2021 on climate change around the world and its impact on fishing and aquaculture. And here you see that in almost all areas of the world, the projection, even with the change of just the scenario 2.6, you will see quite large decreases in likely catch of fish around the world. It's only in the very north where it's assumed that the catches will go up. So it's going to be quite impactful. And because of that, you've got to really think hard about who are the people that are going to be affected. And there's numbers of studies coming along, and the two I've got here is one from the Europe and one from, I think it's the USA, from the west coast of the USA. And you can think about the communities that are at risk and are vulnerable to climate change. And this can be mapped out. The social science processes are really quite clear by now on how to do a risk and vulnerability assessment. And you can see that the highest risk here actually occur in surprising places, parts of the United Kingdom, and then also along the Croatian coast and parts of Spain in terms of Europe. But if you go over to the right-hand side, you could see that the process behind how these maps are made, you look at ecological risk, community exposure, community risk, and community vulnerability when you think about ecological, economic, and social. Now, for me, one of the big challenges, and our first speaker addressed this, I think, quite well, that the problem is that fisheries management cannot adapt. The current management system and governance system assumes stability, and not just stability in the production of the fish at sea, but in the stock integrity, its distribution and species composition. Also stability in the selectivity, the fleet composition and national shares, often resulting in rigidity of that governance system. And in my experience working with ICES, I've seen the direct consequences of this. The mackerel quota, well, not the quota, but the national allocation in the Northeast Atlantic has not been agreed since 2015 at least, partly due to the fact that the governance structure can't change, can't adapt to fish moving into new jurisdictions and trying to find new partnerships and working across all of the contracting parties of some of the regional fisheries management organizations or the coastal states under UNCLOS. So we see that although our fisheries, our ecosystems, our research and our industries and our markets can adapt, the governance system isn't. So let's talk about resilient fisheries. Resilience is the capacity of a system to withstand, recover, adapt or transform in response to change. And in the fisheries systems overall, we generally think ecologically, socially and economically in governance. Properties that contribute to this resilience are learning of the stakeholders, agency, the assets that the stakeholders can call upon, the flexibility of the system and the organization of the system. The ability to build resilience is an important feature of planning and preparedness in the face of climate change. And resilience in social ecological systems relies not only on the availability of assets, but also on the capability to mobilize those assets to enable adaptive behavior. All of this is held in a paper by Sinner et al. 2018, which greatly inspired this work that I'm about to talk about by Julia Mason et al., which I'm a co-author on. What we did was we ran a workshop and carried out a systematic literature review of the attributes for resilience across governance, ecological, and social and economic. And we came up with 38 attributes that bring about resilience in fisheries. The paper has been quite widely cited now, so I think we did a reasonable job, but it was a desk exercise. We went down, we had workshops, and we went through the literature. What we didn't do is say that there is proof that these are all working in terms of providing resilience to fisheries. It was on issues such as responsive governance, accountable governance, inclusivity, diversity of diet, stock status, evolutionary flexibility in terms of ecological, and then psychological and cultural capabilities, wealth and reserves, economic flexibility, community flexibility. So in theory, these might make sense, but let's challenge them. Let's see where we are with the real evidence. We went out and we collected information from 18 different fisheries across the world. Now, these fisheries we tried to get as different as possible. We had large scale, we had small scale, so we had some of the biggest industrial fleets in the world, and we had some of the smallest artisanal subsistence fisheries in the world. We had multi-species and we had single species, and they went from Tasmania up to Iceland. And we also had a mixture of reef, and then we also have pelagic and groundfish. And what we did for each of those attributes that I showed in that kind of circular diagram, we listed a score for each attribute. How does it contribute to resilience in that fishery? Is it high, moderate, low, or very low? And we then allocated scores to each of these and put them all together across the 18 different fisheries that we were looking at. So what I'm about to show you now further on is in fact a reflective of those 18 studies. I'm not saying, and we're not saying, that this is the definitive answer. What we're saying is that these 18 studies show this pattern. What we found was there were 3 key attributes for a resilient fishery: the population abundance, the fish stock. There's a surprise. If you've got lots of fish, you can keep fishing in the context of climate change. In terms of the learning capacity of stakeholders, that was crucial, that it really helps if the people who are involved have the ability to learn and develop. Very relevant for the IOI, obviously, learning is crucial. And responsive governance. Here we have governance creeping in. So what I didn't see in the mackerel fishery in the North Atlantic was brought out as a very important asset in being resilient to climate change. And then when we looked across those fisheries, those 18, we found that the other attributes that came through very strong were ecosystem connectivity, the attachment to place of the stakeholders, so it's a sense of being with the ecosystem that are there, and again, governance came up, accountable governance. So if we take those scores and put them and then cluster all of the fisheries, so we've got Galician stork barnacle, we've got the Fernandez Islands demersal, small pelagics, we've got the US Atlantic, we've got the Maria reef fisheries, all of those, and we look at the scores that we had on each of the attributes. We then can do some mathematics and bring those and cluster them together, and basically they come into 5 groups. But those 5 groups can be further clustered into just 2 groups, and these 2 groups show us that there are quite reasonably successful different paths to resilient fisheries. And they were to have either economic assets and effective governance. So these were basically the Western urbanized, industrialized fisheries. We considered them resilient to climate change in terms of their approaches if they use their economic assets well and had effective governance. Another path to climate resilient fisheries was ecological aspects with strong communities. And here you have communities coming together, working with their ecosystem. So for confronting climate change, can we maintain resilient fisheries? The key message is there are many paths, but with our 18 fisheries, we found 2, and there are viable approaches with different mechanisms. It's important to evaluate the risks and measures across ecological, social and economic and government dimensions. Governance structure is often less responsive than ecosystems or the industries or the markets. And our knowledge base can inform us when change is occurring and about future risks. And I'm a scientist and I've worked with scientists all my career, but can the management system adapt? So far, I'm yet to be convinced. There is a tool, the Climate Resilient Fisheries Planning Tool, which is available on the internet now. It's run by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and by the Environmental Defence Fund, EDF. It has a 6-step process for assessing fisheries climate resilience and identifying approaches and priority actions to help build resilience in fisheries. And I'd like to finish by saying a huge thank you to Kathy Mills and Christian Kleinser of the Environmental Defence Fund and all of the people that I worked with in the SNAP Climate Resilient Fisheries Working Group, and the Fish Score Ocean Decade Programme, which is running at the moment. Many of the people on this slide and myself are engaged with this. It's linked to the UN Decade of Ocean Science, and it's working to try and understand and share experiences about how we build climate resilient fisheries. Thank you very much.
A big thank you to you, Dr. Mark Dickey-Collas, for your very comprehensive presentation on maintaining resilient fisheries amidst climate change challenges. I think your expertise in applied marine science has shed light on the practical strategies that are available and also what needs to be done to ensure sustainability for fisheries resources. And lastly, you highlighted the fact that there is indeed a sustainable way forward. Thank you very much for the presentation. With that, we now move into the last section, the Q&A. Please feel free to raise your hand, or if you've posted them in the Q&A session, I am very happy to read them. If you're going to add your questions in the chat, please kindly clarify which speaker you are addressing. Okay.
Right.
I just saw one came in the chat. It's for Simone. Do you think the IOI should support the formation of the IPOS or not?
Good. I think the IPOS is the international body on ocean science, just one international body, right? There are various arguments. Obviously, because oceans have been studied for much longer than climate, there are many institutions within UNESCO, within the UN itself. Yeah, okay. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Ocean Sustainability. Thank you, Wendy. There is some resistance. There is some resistance saying that my battery is low. Just give me a moment. I don't know why, because it's plugged. Just give me a moment. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Yes, there is some resistance to actually group all the, or rather to create a new institution. And one understands that concern because the other institutions that exist already cannot be told to pack up and leave or stay and while away the time or whatever. So politically, that is an issue. But it does make sense, I believe, that something that is centralized, that where all the scientific information can be centralized and provided in a more integrated manner, I think that would be a very wise idea. And so I would say that something equivalent to the IPCC and IPOS seems to be that kind of body would definitely benefit ocean governance from a more holistic point of view, because even there, if the science is integrated, then it is more likely that the policy making and the lawmaking would be integrated. As it is, it's still very much ocean governance is still very much fragmented between the different sectors. And therefore, if one could imagine a body where all the information from the various sectors is received, and it acts as a clearinghouse, it acts as a collection, as a platform of this information, and comes out more in reports similar to the ones by IPCC, I think yes, that would be a great advantage.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing a question for Dr. Mark Dickey-Collas. The question is there any survey questionnaire based on the resilience framework shared by you in your presentation?
The survey questionnaire, no, I would suggest two things. One, look at the supplementary information in the paper if you have access to that paper. If you don't, please get in touch with me. The second thing is look at that tool, because the planning tool, I think, runs through a whole range of some quite reasonable steps which allow you to think about resilience in fisheries. So I would recommend look at my slides, which are now available on the Google Drive, and click on the link in the PDF to that to the survey to the climate resilience planning tool, and I hope that should be good enough, if I understand the question right.
Thank you very much. And one more for you. Could you please explain a bit further how effective governance is differentiated from strong communities in the two pathways to resilience presented?
That's a very interesting question. The two pathways are quite different in that one of them looked at the institutional setups around governance, and the other one looked at the social cohesion and feelings around the sense of place and community structure. So one was very much a top-down institutional approach, and another was the bottom-up community approach. So a really vulgar way of saying this is, for instance, the very heavy engagement in the USA of the government institutions in the Alaskan fisheries. That really led to, it's heavily managed and well managed, and that led to climate resilient fisheries. But another one, which was very climate resilient, was the Galician barnacle fishery, where the community levels were coming together and coming up with solutions for where they had to adapt to create climate resilient fishing. Was that helpful?
Thank you very much, Mark. Also, please note there's another question addressed to you personally in the comments. I've seen as well a question for Dr. Jacob. Does HIFMB work with systems like OBIS, worms, and if so, how closely?
Thank you very much. Yes, HIFMB researchers and colleagues do work with systems like this. We also work with IMODNet, with FishBase, sometimes in support and sometimes as a user. So that I'm not sure whether that's answering your question, but we are in very close relationship, especially now with IMODNet from the European Commission as a central database, because I believe that there's a wealth of information out there, and we know, quoting David Obura, we know enough about what we need to do, but sometimes the information is so hidden that the access is the problem. It's not the information is there, but how to access it and how to use it in terms of, you get a pile of data and then you question yourself, how do I use it? How can I come up with a map or a table or an indicator that helps exactly my research or policy question? So I think we need to do better there, and at the moment we are supporting IMODNet on that quest.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing a raised hand from Gloria Rodriguez. Gloria, you can unmute and also show your webcam.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Okay, it seems to have frozen.
Yes.
Maybe transfer another question while.
Yes, while we get the
video back.
Yeah.
There was a question on MSP.
I'm seeing I'm seeing what is the impact of trawling on ocean carbon cycle? Question for Dr. Jacob.
I have seen with a small eye the discussion in the chat, and I cannot reiterate the numbers that are in those papers, but I can put the papers, links to the papers in the chat that are discussing exactly that. What I'm seeing, what bottom trawling does, it has a huge impact on biodiversity. It destroys the benthic communities for a good bit. And taking into account the recovery rates, especially of sessile species, we really need to decide whether we want our MPAs to look like that. Because then my question is, if we continue to bottom trawl and to fish in the MPAs as we are doing right now, then why have them? Just to match the political number? Or are we protecting them from some nuclear happenings? I think they are useless if we are not taking them seriously. But I'm happy in terms of the carbon question to put the papers in the chat or the links to the publications.
Thank you. I'm also seeing another question in the Q&A. How much can IOI trigger the IFCPS within its training program, focusing on stakeholder engagement and marine biodiversity?
I think this would be something for Auni, for myself, maybe. I am not sure how much, and I would invite Auni to switch on his camera and join us at this point. I can describe what the IOI intends or aims to do through its training programs, which is to create a groundswell of well-informed, well-trained, what we call future ocean leaders through its training courses. These are people like you in positions where they can make decisions small and large. And the other thing that we try to do is, by virtue of our training, also try to keep abreast of the latest issues, the latest developments, the latest critical, maybe bottlenecks or things like that. Whether this will lead to any, what was the phrase called? Let me find it. What the phrase, any critical to the IFPB? I don't know. A lot depends on the governance structures, as Mark mentioned, as Simone mentioned, and the hope and the belief is that impact for change will come. Whether it leads to it, who knows? Sometimes, as Simone mentioned, goodwill is not necessarily in adequate supply on the right side of the fence. Is it correct?
Quite the thought-provoking question, right, Antonella?
Yes, yes.
I'm seeing another one. How can marine spatial planning be implemented to mitigate climate change impact on coastal zones? It does not specify a speaker, so any of our speakers can jump in.
Yeah, I don't know whether my answer to it is visible. I think it's a question to Mark and I hope he agrees that it needs to be a combination of climate resilient fisheries and climate smart MPAs. We need to find a way to accommodate both. But Mark, the floor is yours.
Well, I agree that, I mean, it has to be a way forward. I mean, the global biodiversity framework says quite clearly with targets 1, 2, 9 and 10 that we all need to work together to consider communities, we need to work together to consider the ecosystem, and we need to work together to consider space. And the key message, which I said at the beginning of my talk, and I'm going to say again, resilient fisheries, or fisheries resilient to climate change, are ones which are well managed. And well managed doesn't only mean ones that have reasonably sustainable catches, but also ones, and I'm going to agree with Ute, although slightly differently, that have a minimum or controlled or managed impact on biodiversity, whether that be species or habitat. So I think we're all in agreement there, and the biodiversity framework, global biodiversity framework, has all that in it as well. So yes.
Thank you very much, Mark. The next question, will the recording be shared? Yes, the recording will be shared, and I posted the link in the chat already. Please bookmark it, either tomorrow or Monday it will become available. I think we can also take 2 live questions. I'm seeing Gloria.
And Gloria's
is
back in,
back.
Cosmin. Gloria's back in. And she's...
Excellent. Gloria, I've allowed you to speak, and I'm also seeing Sunil. Sunil, you're next.
Hi. I prefer not to touch the camera in case I get connection. Nice to meet you again. Nice to see you, but I just want, it has to be quick. I want to know, to Simone and Antonella, are you going to Barcelona? Are you connected with the Ocean Decade?
Antonella, you are muted.
Very briefly, Simone, do you want to answer first?
With the ocean, I didn't hear
The
well.
UN Ocean Decade. It's the meeting in Barcelona in the beginning of April.
I depend very much whether I'm invited as a diplomat to go or not. So I usually follow if I don't go, but if you will be there and I'll be there as well, and Antonella will be there, we'll have a lovely time over a cup of coffee. I think that was the point of your question, isn't it, Gloria?
Yes, otherwise I am planning after that to finally go to Malta, that I have been since I met Elizabeth in 85.
Okay.
I wanted to go to Malta, so finally I will be able to do it, so we'll meet then.
So we'll meet then for sure. And
Good.
Simone will join us.
I am so
Fantastic.
pleased that I am connected again, and
Okay.
I send you, Antonella, what I published. Well, is I haven't do the legal deposit about what I wrote about Elizabeth. So please send me that, your feedback, so I will be sending to the legal deposit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the work you
Okay.
are doing. It's great what you are doing around the world. You are following Elizabeth's legacy.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Cosmin, just a small note. I got a small note from Chertsak. He's also trying to type a question to the text box and not managing.
No worries. Chertsak, after Sunil, you may ask your question, but please note we are entering the last 10 minutes. So from this point onwards, please keep the questions very brief and the answers as well on the brief side. Sunil, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Sunil Shastri. I'm an independent consultant in ocean and environmental governance, and I'm also the director of the IOI Ocean Academy India. Very quickly, but very broadly, I want to ask something, because I have a feeling that we're turning into a lawless society, not necessarily in terms of law, but in terms of our lands being unproductive, our air being unbreathable, and our water being undrinkable. So land, air, and water. Okay, so now with that in mind, and because of the theme of this today's seminar is this, interface between ocean and the sea, the 2 big players that we have now are the High Seas Treaty and the COPS and the UNFCCC. So how can you put me in a positive frame of mind, any of the 3 speakers, or Antonella or Cosmin or Avni, and say how things are going to be going from here, maybe a decade, talking about the UN Decade of Ocean Science also. So just a very broad question, anybody wants to sort of put me in a positive frame of mind. Thank you.
We get bombarded with a lot of negativity, Sunil, so it's an excellent question.
Anybody would like to kind of give me a thought?
What I said in my presentation, it takes a village, you know, and we know what's at stake. So this should put us in a positive fighting mode.
Exactly.
I mean, there are a lot of challenges ahead, and sometimes, as said, contradicting, or where the trade-offs are not directly visible, and it will take some time to see that activities for climate change, for resilient fisheries, and for bending the curve for biodiversity loss might be contradicting, but on the long run, they might be supporting each other. So it really takes a village. So that is we cannot give up. I mean, what's the alternative if we give up? So that's not, I think that's not an option, but I also see the others raising their hands and so
optimism takes us forward. Yeah.
I think as Ute said, I've always had as my motto, giving up is not an option. And I think that is a very valuable motto to have if you work in the field of environmental issues, because I mean things are science is always urging us to act and act fast, and obviously politics and law take a very long time. Having said that, having been in the field for a very long time, what today we assume as a given was not there 30 years ago. And so baby steps, in fact, do lead to further advances. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of strategy. What is very important is that people understand that when they say they support the environment, they really know what they mean, because very often there is a general trend for the public, especially the young people, to really, you know, be very vociferous about the environment. And then you have a law, which in some way is a climate measure. And this is very unpopular because obviously it affects, I don't know, it affects our behavior, etc. And often this means that governments who pass these types of laws are then punished at the next election. This is a reality happening over and over. And at the moment in Europe, we are in a bit of a crisis because there are factions and sectors that are arguing climate measures are causing a lot of harm. And unfortunately, because we have a lot of populist leaders coming up, they are embarking on this kind of, you know, this kind of thinking to destroy the advances made. We have to realize as the general public that if we really mean that the environment needs to be protected, whether it's climate or the oceans, things have got to change. And for that, it takes time. But this is it. We can't afford to stop the initiatives that have been taken. We really need to press for this.
Thank you, Simone. Actually, it reminds me of Elizabeth's famous quote, and she used to say, "I'm too lazy to give up."
I think if I may add just a little bit to what our speakers have said and what Simone has said just now, I can't help but remark how important it is to have people who are what we now call ocean literate, who understand their impact on the ocean and the ocean's impact on their lives, as Simone said, as Ute said, as Mark said, when referring to the fisheries communities. I think you need to understand the pros and cons of whatever it is you're doing. I know that the IOI, with the help of its huge family internationally, does its best. Here we work in ocean literacy and training and so on and so on. But I really would not be with the IOI if I didn't believe so strongly in the power of knowledge to move the needle forward.
Thanks, Antonella.
Thank you very much. Sunil?
Shall I chip in here? Yeah.
Yes.
You want positivity. Unfortunately, as you said, your question, a lot of negativity came in my head because I'm particularly upset at the moment in one of the most technologically engineered advanced data-rich parts of the world, we still have badly managed fisheries, not necessarily as a result of the fishermen or fisheries communities, I have to say, but often as a result of national politics. But having said that, you want positivity. Sharks are coming back in the European area, at least, due to consideration in terms of management. Whales are coming back. Dolphins and porpoises, less well. We've got some major problems there. In many parts of the world, vulnerable deep sea, vulnerable marine ecosystems are being identified and protected, and that protection is occurring. So that's all good news. People are beginning to say that having no data, and Ute touched on having no data is not an excuse for inaction. We need to find mechanisms and approaches that can help communities and biodiversity when we have no data. And my final positive message, in my talks to many of the fish people at FAO, they are taking the global biodiversity framework very, very seriously. They're taking the issue of small-scale fisheries very seriously, and they're taking the issue of climate change very seriously. So they're putting together guidelines for the world, which I think will help in terms of bringing positive moves forward. In fact, I think they'll be quite pleased I said that, because normally I criticize them.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, all the speakers. Unfortunately, we're running a bit tight on time. I'm seeing online Dr. Auni Benham, who's I think is familiar to quite a few of our participants. He is the IOI honorary president, and I'm sure he's itching to say something on today's webinar. Auni, you may unmute.
Unmute. Okay, you hear me?
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Okay. No, all I want to say is congratulations to you guys and to UNCTAD, always in my mind, to IOI. IOI has evolved. And what we see today, what we saw is part of this evolution of IOI. Without the straitjackets of rules and regulations, etc., those who have been associated with UNCTAD, particularly recently, have managed to move IOI to a situation where we have this wonderful connection with alumni and the capacity to upgrade and bring them on board in thinking about the current issues. The only thing that you would all disagree with me, I say truly that the way that the oceans have been brought into the COP and into the climate change, maybe to the oceans and the work that has been done with the oceans. The interdependence we all recognize, but there is a chance that we will lose the focus if we continue just to look at this interdependence between ocean and climate. Climate is the result of the ocean. We don't have a climate if we don't have the ocean. So it's not an attachment that an annex to climate change. And we may lose focus by trying to solve the ocean issues, which are really issues of that. And there's one thing that I really enjoyed, the fisheries lecture. In all this, I was just hoping once to have a mention of the suffering and of the seafarers. Maybe the sharks are back because they throw too many seafarers into the ocean. I see you smiling. Well, congratulations, Cosmin and Tinella, for this, and I hope this will continue and will be part of how IOI is evolving.
Thank you very much, Auni, for those words. We have exactly 2 more minutes, and I'm seeing another question from the chat. Maheen, please feel free to unmute. Antonella, I think you're muted as well.
Maheen, will you unmute to ask the question, or has she typed it out and we can read it out?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay. Maheen, I think you're still muted. You will have to unmute your microphone to be able to ask your question since your hand is raised.
Thank you very much also to the speakers. I'm seeing you typing the answers in the chat to the questions we didn't deal with. Thank you for that.
If we make Maheen a presenter, do you think she can ask her question, or?
It's still gonna be muted.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay, fine.
Yes, she is.
There she is.
Okay,
She's speaking.
thanks. Anyway, thank you very much for all the excellent presentation, which I very much enjoyed. But I just wanted to a small comment on what Simone said, that Simone showed that the number of, laws and conventions we have got. We have got quite a few conventions, the recently new treaty, UN treaty adopted and all this. And Simone also highlighted that these conventions and the laws, they have got to find their ways into the national law to be applied. I think this is really extremely, extremely important. We have, in our experience in UNCTAD and then with UNCTAD and UNCITRAL, there was a convention which very much, yes, Ani is saying that it's the Hamburg rules. UNCITRAL people, they promoted so much, they entered into force, but in reality, it was only in paper enforced, but in application, no, because it was in theory. No one took any, no country, in developing countries, took any action to implement it in the national law. It was not in the national law. It was never applied. So therefore, it is important. This one highlights the importance of the work of IOI is doing through this alumni and all this, creating awareness, ocean knowledge, awareness, what to do with these conventions, what to do with these laws. It just by the fact that the government signs the convention, it doesn't become, not all conventions are like that. There are conventions that you have got to implement into your national law and apply, and then give the information to people, to the to policymakers, to write it down, to judges and all these things to apply. So it is important that for IOI, it is extremely important, the work of IOI, capacity development makes it more and more important, what the IOI is doing. And then, of course, thanks to alumni and then all this Ocean Academy directors and all that their focal points and all of them, they are going and then they're promoting these issues and all this, creating awareness. That's all we need is ocean knowledge. Everybody, ocean knowledge, policymakers and then practical practitioners and then the users and then the customer, everybody, ocean knowledge. So that's the key issue. And thank you very much for organizing this webinar, and then we really enjoyable, and then thank you for all presentation and the participants. Many thanks. Sorry, 2 more minutes I took extra, sorry. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Maheen. And I think that brings today's session to an end. There's going to be the next webinar in about 3 months. Most likely the next, give or take, and we'll be dealing again with what we think and what we hope is a very exciting topic, which will be carbon capture with the help of the ocean. You'll see our emails as usual, and I'm gonna share, before I end the meeting, I'm gonna share the link to subscribe to the IOI Informa, which is our news bulletin. So you may receive news of the next events. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all for making the time to be here with us today, and we hope we've captured your attention as well with a teaser of the next topic.
Thank you.
So thank you to
Thank
the
you.
speakers
Thank you.
most of all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Ute. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Simone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. I think you can just. Thanks, Lily. Thank you, everyone. We're seeing the messages come up. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well done, Cos.
Thank you.
I always wish we had more time for questions.
I know. I feel the same. See you soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Ciao. Bye, everyone.